Hello, men. Good to see you. In Romans chapter 11, verses 1 through 5, Paul is reminding his readers that even though it may seem like the entire Jewish community rejected Jesus as the Messiah, that there is always a faithful remnant, Jew or Gentile, according to the election of grace. And in these verses, Paul looks back to Elijah, where Elijah felt like he was, the last man standing, so to speak, and that there was no other believers around. And God reminded Elijah that no, there are thousands of other men who are still followers of me. They have not bowed the knee to Baal, so to speak. And it's a reminder to us, men, that when we feel like we're in a situation where there's no other believers around us, there is always a faithful remnant. God's people are everywhere, and that we should always remember that no matter what the situation is, there's somebody there. There's always an ability to connect with another man of God. And of course, we're encouraged to do that. But the more important point, I think, of these verses is where Paul goes into the fact that this faithful remnant was according to the election of grace. And this election of saving grace, of course, is what he's speaking about here, is something that was at the center of a lot of controversy for centuries in the Christian faith, still is today. Is it, like Calvin put it, that it's irresistible grace, that when somebody has a saving grace, they just have no free will in the matter, and this is a special grace only for the people that God chooses to save? Or is it what Arminian spoke about, which is prevenient grace? It's enough grace to make a decision for Jesus. For example, it's enough grace that I get convicted about my sin, and so therefore I am willing to entertain the idea that I need salvation, and that I'm being offered that through the cross of Jesus Christ. Well, I would suggest that the saving grace that was needed to save any particular soul was enough grace. Was it seemingly irresistible? For example, in Paul's case, when he was Saul of Tarsus and he saw the risen Lord, and and you're just so in the presence of this light and this voice, and that it was just irresistible that he had to come to faith. Or was it that maybe he could have marginalized that as a bad dream later and walked off, which of course he did not do? Have a family member, and she talked about how she was drawn to this, to salvation. She just felt compelled to walk up at an altar call in a church, like she just didn't have any real choice in the matter. Or did she? She felt this irresistible urge, but she still went ahead and walked up there and to some extent made that decision. In my analysis and looking around, grace varies. People have different stories. There's people like me who did a lot of wrestling with God. Was that irresistible grace? Oh boy, I sure did a lot of resisting. At the end of the day, my metaphor for all of this comes from the movie Hitch, and you may remember that. It was the importance of the first kiss, that the man would only go in 90% of the way and allow the woman to come in the last 10% for the kiss, that you don't go all the way in that way. And isn't that the way with God? That God kept wooing us to the point where finally we made that last little step. And so whether it's 90% or 99.9%, the fact of the matter is that God does extend grace, and that at the end of the day, there is that little bit in us that receives. And that's really at the heart of the gospel. back to John's Gospel, chapter 1, verses 12 and 13, that those who received him, Jesus, they are the ones that have the right to become a child of God. There is still this receiving of that, this volitional act at the end, where we finally, after all this work that God has done on our hearts and our minds, we're softened up. As Jesus called it in the parable, as sower, it's the ground that's ready to receive the seed. It's the ground that is the fertile soil, and in that fertile soil, that seed of the gospel gets planted, and we make a decision for Jesus. And so that is the election of grace. It's important for us to remember that, yes, God's grace, whether you want to call it common grace or special grace or prevenient grace or irresistible grace, there is grace out there. And so we need to be praying for our loved ones that God would extend them a measure of grace, that they too can come to a saving faith in the Lord. And so until I see you again, may the Lord richly bless you, my brothers.